Have you ever wondered what happens when a narcissist smiles smugly, certain he has buried you alive? Completely unaware you are a seed taking root, people claim living well is the best revenge. But in modern corporate America, I learned that the ultimate revenge is an undeniable trail of evidence exposed in broad daylight. My story is not a loud tantrum. It is a cold psychological chess match where the predator became my prey. Never mistake silence for weakness. Hello to all the wonderful listeners of Boss Revenge Stories. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently demonetized our channel, leaving us without the operating budget to keep the lights on and pay our hard-working team. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our staff can cover their living expenses and continue creating these satisfying tales for you. You can easily support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. My name is Chloe Alexander. I am 34 years old, and stepping back into the sleek, steel and glass headquarters of Aegis Flow Logistics in Austin, Texas, was the most grueling physical task of my adult life. I had been gone for exactly 6 months. A horrific car crash had shattered my right leg, leaving me with a collection of titanium pins, a brutal scar, and a heavy wooden cane just to keep myself upright. Every single step I took sent a sharp jolt of fire traveling straight up my spine, but the intense physical agony was absolutely nothing compared to the cold, sterile cruelty of the corporate slaughterhouse I was walking back into. What no one in this massive building knew was that my time away was not solely spent in physical therapy clinics, while I was isolated in a hospital bed, gritting my teeth and learning how to walk all over again. The board of directors had been quietly reviewing the rapidly rotting foundation of the company. Behind closed doors, they secretly appointed me as the new chief operating officer. My mandate from the board was incredibly simple and entirely ruthless. I was to clean up the mess, excise the toxic cancer killing the company culture, and restore order by any means necessary. I was no longer just a mid-level manager trying to survive the daily grind. I was the executioner, hiding in plain sight. It was my very first day back on the job. I wore a sharply tailored charcoal gray suit, leaning heavily on my cane as I crossed the pristine, echoing marble lobby. The morning rush was in full swing, a chaotic blur of expensive coffee, ringing phones, and rushing footsteps. I slowly made my way toward the executive elevator bank, my damaged leg screaming in protest with every forced shift of my weight. That was the exact moment I ran into Vance Sterling. Vance was the director of sales, a man who wore his towering arrogance like an expensive, suffocating cologne. He firmly considered himself the untouchable golden boy of Aegis Flow Logistics because he brought in high revenue. He operated under the delusion that the company was his personal playground, and everyone else was merely peasant labor meant to serve him. I reached the open elevator just as the doors were about to close. Instead of holding them for me, Vance stepped squarely into the center of the doorway, physically blocking my path with his broad shoulders. He was flanked by his usual entourage of 3 sycophantic junior sales guys who laughed at all his terrible jokes. He looked down at my wooden cane, a cruel, mocking smirk twisting his perfectly sculpted face. He did not offer a professional greeting. Instead, he raised his voice so the entire crowded lobby could hear him clearly. "Did the hospital send a defective patient back to the wrong office?" Vance laughed, a harsh, grating sound that his pathetic followers immediately echoed. "Do not get in the way of the team actually making the money. We have real work to do." A young female intern, who looked no older than 22, was standing near the wall clutching a cardboard tray of iced coffees. Her eyes were wide with shock. Vance noticed her staring at his display of cruelty. To reassert his absolute dominance and demonstrate exactly how little he cared about anyone beneath his pay grade, he casually swiped his heavy hand outward. He intentionally knocked a full, large cup of dark coffee right off her tray. The liquid exploded across the pristine white marble floor, splashing onto the intern's shoes. She gasped, shrinking back against the wall in sheer terror. Vance did not even look at her. He turned his dead, cold eyes back to me, fully believing I was still the powerless, irrelevant middle manager who had left 6 months ago. "You are standing right there anyway," he commanded, his tone dripping with absolute, unfiltered contempt. "Go get a mop and clean that up before someone slips." The old version of me might have flushed red with embarrassment. The old me might have stammered out a weak defense or hurried away just to escape the public humiliation. But the grueling pain of the last 6 months had burned away any remaining tolerance I had for men like him. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I did not utter a single syllable in response. I certainly did not announce my new executive title. I simply stood there in the silence, leaning heavily on my cane, staring dead into his eyes. I committed every microscopic detail of his smug, entitled face to memory, carving this exact moment deep into my mind. Let him think he was the apex predator of this office. Let him think I was broken and weak. I held his gaze with a chilling calmness until his arrogant smirk faltered slightly, just a fraction of an inch. Then, without making a sound, I turned my back on him and the open elevator. I walked over to the emergency stairwell, gripped the heavy metal handrail tight, and began the agonizing climb up to the executive floor, step by painful step. Let the golden boy enjoy his hollow victory this morning. He had no idea his corporate grave was already being dug. The neon lights of the Austin skyline bled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, casting long, distorted shadows across my mahogany desk. For the first 21 days, I existed as a ghost within the machine. I kept my head down, limping quietly through the hallways, projecting the exact image everyone expected to see: a broken, defeated middle manager merely trying to survive until Friday. But the moment my office door clicked shut, the illusion vanished. Behind the safety of frosted glass, I logged into the master servers using my newly minted, unrestricted executive credentials. I became the all-seeing eye of Aegis Flow Logistics. The company network was a massive digital nervous system, and I watched every single pulse from the shadows. What I uncovered during those late nights was a level of systemic toxicity that made the air in the building feel heavy and unbreathable. Vance had not just built a sales department. He had engineered a hostile, untouchable boys' club. Through archived email threads and supposed private instant messaging channels, I watched his reign of terror unfold in plain text. He routinely suffocated female employees, burying them under impossible deadlines while explicitly handing the most lucrative client portfolios to his sycophantic male friends. If anyone dared to question his methods, their work schedules were immediately and maliciously altered. He weaponized shifts, forcing single mothers to work late Friday evenings or scheduling dissenting junior representatives for early weekend calls just to watch them squirm. The sheer scale of his cruelty was staggering, but it was always calculated. He stole credit with the precision of a seasoned pickpocket, ensuring his fingerprints were wiped clean while he stood on the shoulders of the people he crushed. The turning point happened late one Tuesday night. The office was mostly empty, the rhythmic hum of the central air conditioning echoing through the desolate corridors. I was making a slow, painful trip to the restroom when I heard a muffled, ragged sound coming from the last stall. I pushed the heavy wooden door open and found Maya. Maya was a brilliant, quiet data analyst who had been working 85 hours a week to finalize the quarterly logistics forecast. She was sitting on the cold tile floor, clutching her laptop to her chest, her face red and streaked with tears. "Are you all right?" I asked softly, leaning my heavy weight onto my cane. Maya flinched, looking up with absolute terror in her eyes. When she saw it was only me, the quiet woman with the limp, she let out a shaky breath. "He took it," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and complete exhaustion. I spent 4 entire months building the predictive routing model. It was supposed to be my ticket to a promotion. Vance just walked into my cubicle, leaned over my desk, and told me to change the author name on the title slide to his. He said if I refused, he would tell the directors that I was completely uncooperative and have me transferred to the dead male sorting facility in the basement. My grip on the handle of my wooden cane tightened until my knuckles turned completely white. "And you changed it," I stated, not as a question, but as a cold fact. She nodded, burying her face in her hands. "I need this job to pay my rent. I cannot afford to fight the golden boy." I did not offer her empty platitudes. I did not pat her shoulder and tell her everything would magically be fine. I just handed her a paper towel, waited for her to breathe normally, and walked back to my office. That night, I opened a heavily encrypted, partitioned drive on my secure server. I titled the hidden folder the Death Corner. Inside, I began archiving absolutely everything. I saved every single abusive text message, every altered time card, every stolen presentation. I built a silent fortress of data around his monstrous ego. But as the file grew, a bitter, cynical realization settled deep in my chest. I spent hours reading through the archived complaint logs submitted to the Human Resources Department over the past 2 years. There were dozens of reports detailing Vance and his abusive behavior, and every single one of them had been systematically buried, classified as resolved through mediation, or outright dismissed as a misunderstanding. Human Resources was entirely useless. They were not designed to protect the employees. They were designed to protect the company. And to the company, Vance brought in 22% of the gross annual revenue. His massive sales numbers created a blinding, impenetrable halo that shielded him from any consequences regarding workplace harassment. If I fired Vance solely for being a toxic bully, Human Resources and the board would go to war to protect him. They would claim I was acting out of a personal vendetta. They would slap his wrist with a warning and force me to reinstate him. I could not just attack his character. His character was already rotten, and the company simply did not care. If I wanted to rip him out by the roots, I needed a much sharper blade. I needed to bypass human decency and strike directly at the only thing this corporation actually respected. I had to hit his wallet, and I had to uncover a lie so massive that no amount of sales revenue could ever cover the stench. The predator always senses when the environment shifts, even just a fraction of a degree. Despite my careful navigation through the archives, my footprint in the legacy contracts did not go entirely unnoticed. Vance was arrogant, but he possessed the paranoid instincts of a guilty man. He noticed someone was querying his old regional accounts. He did not know it was the chief operating officer conducting a forensic audit. He just thought the crippled mid-level manager was sticking her nose where it did not belong. He decided it was time to teach me a lesson and put me back in my place. On a Thursday afternoon, my screen suddenly flashed gray. An entire database containing the logistics manifests for a major regional shipping partner simply vanished. It was wiped completely clean right before my eyes. 60 seconds later, an urgent automated ticket was generated, flagging my terminal. Vance immediately marched out of his glass office, loudly declaring to the entire floor that a critical software error had just occurred due to poor handling by an incompetent newbie. He wanted everyone to know I had ruined a major account. 10 minutes after that, a company-wide email landed in every single inbox. It was sent from a masked, anonymous server address. But the toxic venom dripping from the words had Vance written all over it. The subject line read, "Operational Efficiency." The body of the email was brief and ruthlessly sharp. It stated that logistics was a fast-paced environment, and anyone who was too slow in both body and mind should politely step away from the controls before they caused a catastrophic system failure. It was a blatant, public humiliation designed to break my spirit and force me to quit. I did not throw a tantrum. I did not storm into his office demanding an apology. Instead, I quietly locked my workstation, picked up my cane, and took the elevator down to the sub-basement. The server room was a freezing, windowless cavern bathed in the eerie blue glow of server racks. It was the absolute domain of Marcus. Marcus was a brilliant, highly introverted network security specialist who practically lived on energy drinks and code. 6 months ago, Vance had publicly screamed at Marcus in the main lobby, calling him a useless keyboard monkey because the Wi-Fi in the executive boardroom had dropped for exactly 2 minutes. Marcus never forgot that humiliation. I walked into his domain, the heavy door sealing shut behind me. Marcus looked up from his dual monitors, his eyes narrowing. I am not supposed to run diagnostics for anyone below department head, Marcus stated flatly. I reached into my blazer, pulled out a heavily encrypted black flash drive, and placed it on his desk. I am not here for a diagnostic. Marcus, I need you to bypass the internal firewalls, recover a deleted manifest from Terminal 42, and trace the internal routing protocol to find the exact machine that executed the wipe command. And I need it done completely off the official grid. Marcus stared at the drive, then looked up at me, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. He did not ask questions. He simply cracked his knuckles and began to type. For the next 2 hours, the only sound in the freezing room was the frantic clacking of his mechanical keyboard. The atmosphere was thick with tension, a high-stakes digital hunt playing out in lines of scrolling green text. Marcus bypassed the superficial masks easily. He dove straight into the raw network traffic, pulling the deleted data out of the system cache. Got him, Marcus whispered, his eyes locked on the screen. The wipe command originated from Vance's personal IP address. He bounced it through a proxy server in the marketing department to make it look anonymous, but the MAC address belongs to his machine. We had the smoking gun for sabotage, but as Marcus ran the recovery script to restore the missing regional contracts, the software flagged a bizarre anomaly. A massive block of data was heavily encrypted, hidden beneath layers of ghost directories. Wait a second, Marcus muttered, leaning closer to the monitors. This makes no sense. The payment routing on these recovered contracts is completely fractured. The main invoice goes to the legitimate client, but the actual fulfillment budgets are being sliced. Someone is skimming the margins. Show me, I commanded, stepping right behind his chair. Marcus ran a decryption algorithm, breaking the lock on the hidden ledgers. Suddenly, a completely different financial picture flooded the screen. My heart slammed against my ribs as the realization hit me. I was looking at a massive, bleeding financial black hole. For the past 3 years, Vance had been quietly intercepting Aegis Flow Logistics' most lucrative shipping contracts. Instead of assigning our internal fleet, he was outsourcing the heavy lifting to a supposed third-party subcontractor named Apex Freight. The rates Apex Freight charged were astronomical, bleeding our profit margins entirely dry. Marcus, pull the state business registry for Apex Freight. Cross-reference the registered owner. He typed furiously. The state database loaded, revealing the incorporation documents. The registered owner of Apex Freight was a man named Richard Thorne. I knew that name. I had seen it on Vance's emergency contact form. Richard Thorne was Vance's brother-in-law. The pieces of the puzzle violently snapped together, painting a terrifying and criminal masterpiece. Apex Freight was a ghost company. It was a hollow shell. Vance was handing our premium contracts to his own family, authorizing millions of dollars in corporate payouts for phantom logistics services and pocketing the massive difference. He was not just a bully. He was not just an arrogant narcissist torturing his subordinates for sport. Vance Sterling was a corporate parasite. He was actively siphoning millions of dollars from the very company that worshipped him. I stared at the glowing blue numbers on the screen, a cold, ruthless energy settling deep inside my bones. The game had just changed. I no longer just wanted him fired. I wanted him entirely destroyed. Possessing ironclad proof of massive corporate fraud is like holding a loaded gun. The temptation to immediately pull the trigger, to storm into the boardroom and watch the tyrant fall, is nearly overwhelming. But I did not spend 6 agonizing months rebuilding my shattered body just to hand Vance Sterling a quick, merciful death. A simple termination would allow him to spin the narrative, hire expensive lawyers, and perhaps even negotiate a quiet severance package. I did not want him to just fall. I wanted him to eagerly dig a hole so deep and so dark that no lawyer on earth could ever pull him out. I needed him to commit the crime right in front of an audience. I needed a honeypot, a trap so irresistibly sweet that his monumental greed would blind him to the wires attached to it. Working late into the night, I carefully fabricated an entirely new, highly classified logistics initiative. I disguised it as an experimental expansion strategy for our largest national retail client. The fake proposal outlined a desperate need for an emergency overflow shipping partner, offering a staggering operating budget of $4,500,000 for a 6-month trial period. The margins were deliberately designed to be unbelievably fat, practically screaming for a corrupt middleman to skim off the top. The next morning, I intentionally left a printed copy of the preliminary budget overview sitting on Maya's desk while she was away at lunch. I knew Vance monitored her workstation like a hawk, constantly looking for new ideas to steal and claim as his own. It took exactly 2 hours for the bait to be swallowed whole. From the secure feed in my office, I watched the security camera footage as Vance marched directly into Maya's cubicle. He slammed his hand flat onto her desk, trapping the fake project dossier beneath his palm. Even without audio, his aggressive posturing was unmistakable. He leaned in close, his face red with sudden excitement and authoritarian rage. Later, Maya quietly confirmed the details to me. He had demanded full administrative control over the new contract, explicitly threatening to ruin her upcoming performance review if she even thought about taking the project to upper management without his approval. He aggressively reassigned the entire account to his personal portfolio, completely cutting her out of the loop. Vance took the stolen project and ran with it, completely unaware he was sprinting headfirst into a meticulously crafted slaughterhouse. Over the next 72 hours, Marcus and I monitored every single digital breath Vance took, like clockwork. His profound arrogance and insatiable greed dictated his every move, believing that I was nothing more than an incompetent, physically broken manager who could not even secure her own data. He barely bothered to cover his tracks. He rapidly initiated the vendor onboarding process, bypassing standard compliance protocols by using his executive override privileges. He awarded the entire $4,500,000 emergency contract directly to Apex Freight. I sat in my office, watching the digital signatures lock into place on my screen. He had just authorized a massive transfer of corporate funds to his brother-in-law's phantom company. The noose was now securely tied, and he had wrapped it around his own neck with a triumphant smile. To ensure he felt completely invincible, I had to play the role of the helpless victim perfectly. During our weekly departmental strategy sessions, I purposefully allowed him to dominate the room. I sat quietly at the far end of the long conference table, my wooden cane resting against my chair, staring down at my notepad. Vance strutted around the room like a peacock. He loudly interrupted me every single time I attempted to speak. He mocked my departmental performance metrics, calling them slow and sluggish, just like my walking pace. He proudly announced to the entire junior management team that he had single-handedly secured a massive new operational contract that would save the quarter, indirectly implying that my department was entirely useless. "Some of us actually drive revenue," Vance sneered during a Tuesday morning stand-up, looking pointedly at my cane. "While others just drag their feet and drain the company resources, it is all about forward momentum. You either keep up or you get out of the way." The sycophants in the room chuckled nervously. I did not react. I simply offered him a weak, defeated nod and apologized for interrupting his flow. I fed his colossal ego exactly what it craved, inflating his false sense of absolute supremacy until it was ready to burst. He believed he was completely untouchable. Meanwhile, in the absolute secrecy of the shadows, the execution was being meticulously prepared. I was not building a standard quarterly report. I was designing a parallel presentation. I compiled every stolen email, every abusive chat log, every manipulated time card, and the definitive financial records proving his massive embezzlement scheme involving Apex Freight. I locked the entire presentation behind a military-grade encryption key. On Friday afternoon, I made a highly confidential phone call to the head of our internal legal department. I instructed them to draft an immediate, non-negotiable termination order for cause, stripping Vance of all invested stock options, severing his benefits, and explicitly waiving any severance pay. I also told them to have local law enforcement on standby for potential corporate fraud and grand theft. The trap was fully armed, All I had to do now was wait for the golden boy to step up to the podium and proudly seal his own doom in front of the entire world. The atmosphere in the building shifted dramatically as the third week of October arrived. It was the week of the annual board meeting, the most critical event of the corporate calendar. The largest investors, stakeholders holding tens of millions of dollars in equity, descended upon the Austin headquarters. The air was thick, suffocating with high stakes and unspoken tension. Everyone was on edge, except for one man. From my hidden vantage point on the network, I intercepted a private message Vance sent to his inner circle of loyal subordinates just 48 hours before the presentation. The text glowed on my monitor, dripping with unchecked delusion. "Get ready to watch me send the cripple straight to a permanent retirement home," he typed. "This new freight project is my golden ticket. By Friday, I will be sitting in the Chief Operating Officer chair. To ensure his total victory," he went a step further. He manually altered the network permissions on the boardroom audiovisual system, explicitly revoking my terminal access. He wanted to guarantee that if I even attempted to present my departmental data, I would be staring at a locked screen. He was effectively gagging me before I even stepped into the room. Monday morning finally broke. The executive boardroom on the 50th floor was a magnificent display of wealth, featuring a massive polished mahogany table and panoramic views of the city. Vance arrived early, wearing a ridiculously expensive bespoke navy blue suit that probably cost more than what most of his junior staff made in 3 months. He commanded the space with the swagger of an uncrowned king. He strutted around the perimeter of the room, confidently shaking hands with the silver-haired investors and slapping the board members on the back as if they were his old college drinking buddies. I was the absolute last person to enter the room. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the rhythmic, hollow tapping of my wooden cane echoed sharply against the hardwood floor. The low murmur of conversation dipped slightly as a few investors cast pitying glances my way. I ignored them completely. I slowly made my way to the furthest, darkest corner of the long table, taking a seat in the shadows. I settled in, smoothed the skirt of my suit, and offered a faint, almost invisible smile to the security camera mounted in the corner. It was my silent signal to Marcus, who was locked inside the freezing server room directly below us, his fingers hovering over the master override switch. Vance shot me a look of pure, triumphant disdain, completely unaware of the lethal trap sitting mere inches from his own hands. At the absolute head of the table sat the chairman of the board. Resting right beside the chairman's left arm was his battered, vintage leather briefcase. No one in that room, least of all the golden boy currently adjusting his silk tie, had any idea what was inside it. They did not know that late Sunday evening, I had personally driven to the chairman's private estate. I had handed him a meticulously bound, 300-page physical copy of the Death Corner dossier. The guillotine was already raised. The blade was razor sharp. Now, all I had to do was let Vance pull the lever himself. The executive boardroom was a theater, and Vance Sterling was ready to deliver the performance of his lifetime. He stood confidently at the head of the massive mahogany table, a sleek wireless presenter remote resting easily in his right hand. The room was packed with the most powerful stakeholders of Aegis Flow Logistics. Men and women in tailored suits who controlled hundreds of millions of dollars sat with their eyes glued to him. He was charming, dynamic, and completely full of himself. For too long, our supply chain has been crippled by outdated thinking and, quite frankly, a lack of forward momentum from our mid-level management. Vance projected his voice clearly, letting his eyes dart to the dark corner where I sat in silence. "We have been dragging dead weight, but this new emergency freight initiative changes absolutely everything. It bypasses the sluggish operational drag of the current logistics department and directly secures our most critical national retail client. It is sleek, it is aggressive, and it is going to guarantee our third quarter dominance." He paced back and forth, completely owning the room. The investors nodded in slow, synchronized approval. They loved a winner. They loved the aggressive sales pitch. "And now," Vance said, his signature smug smile spreading across his perfectly tanned face as he turned toward the gigantic, wall-sized projection screen behind him. Let us take a look at the projected profit margins for the next 6 months. Prepare to be impressed. He pressed the button on his remote. The massive screen went entirely black. For 3 agonizingly long seconds, the boardroom was plunged into an uncomfortable silence. Vance frowned, mashing the button on his remote a second time. Just a minor technical hiccup, he chuckled smoothly, trying to maintain his effortless facade. You know how these network systems are, always breaking down when you need them. Suddenly, the screen flared back to life with a blinding, stark white light. But there was no graph. There was no chart detailing a $4,500,000 profit margin. Instead, a highly detailed, scanned legal document completely filled the display. It was the official state business registration for Apex Freight. The text was magnified perfectly, so that even the oldest investor in the room could read it clearly. Highlighted in bright, glowing yellow was the name of the registered owner, Richard Thorne. Directly beside the registration document, a second window opened automatically. It was a perfectly formatted, undeniable ledger of outgoing wire transfers from Aegis Flow Logistics to Apex Freight, spanning the last 36 months. The total amount skimmed and siphoned out of the company treasury sat boldly at the bottom of the column, $3,850,000. The air was immediately sucked out of the room. The silence was no longer uncomfortable. It was lethal. Vance froze. The smug smile instantly slid off his face, replaced by a mask of sheer, unadulterated panic. The blood drained completely from his cheeks, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified ghost. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. "What is this?" one of the lead investors barked, slamming his hand flat on the table. "Sterling, what are we looking at?" "It is a virus," Vance finally shrieked, his voice cracking violently. The charming facade shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. He wildly pointed his remote at the screen, clicking it over and over again as if he could shoot the images away. "The network has been hacked. Somebody get the information technology team in here right now. Shut the projector off. Unplug the machine." But Marcus was locked safely in the basement, and he was just getting started. Vance could not stop the avalanche. The screen automatically transitioned. The financial ledgers vanished, instantly replaced by a rapid-fire slideshow of horror. First came the internal email threads. The massive screen displayed Maya's stolen predictive routing model, clearly showing Vance demanding she remove her name under the threat of demotion. Then came the chat logs from his private channel, the text blown up to massive proportions. The investors watched in stunned horror as they read his vile, unfiltered thoughts about the female staff, his blatant boasts about ruining careers, and his mocking jokes about my physical disability. The final nail in his coffin was the security camera footage. The high-definition video played smoothly, showing Vance sneaking onto the proxy server late at night. The investors watched him manually execute the wipe command to destroy the regional database, purely to frame my department for a catastrophic operational failure. There was nowhere left for him to hide. The truth was burning brightly on a 200-inch display for the most powerful people in the company to see. Vance was hyperventilating now, clutching the edge of the podium so tightly his knuckles were stark white. He looked wildly around the room, making eye contact with the men who had been praising him just 5 minutes ago. They stared back at him with absolute, unmasked disgust. That was when I made my move. I placed my hands firmly on the armrests of my chair and pushed myself up. The heavy wooden tip of my cane struck the hardwood floor with a loud, sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot through the silent room. Every single head whipped around to look at me as I stepped slowly out of the shadows. I walked the length of the room, my limp prominent but my posture entirely unbending. I did not stop until I was standing directly across from the podium, staring straight into Vance's panicked, trembling eyes. "It is not a virus, Vance," I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls, cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "It is a forensic audit." "You did this," he spat, pointing a shaking finger at me. You crazy, crippled. I am Chloe Alexander, I interrupted him, raising my voice effortlessly to dominate the room. And for the past 6 months, I have not been a mid-level manager. By a unanimous, confidential vote from the board of directors, I am the Chief Operating Officer of Aegis Flow Logistics. My mandate was to locate the cancer rotting this company from the inside out and surgically remove it. I found it. At the head of the table, the chairman of the board finally moved. He unlatched his vintage leather briefcase. He pulled out the massive, 300-page physical copy of the Death Corner dossier. He lifted it high and slammed it down onto the center of the mahogany table with incredible force. You are completely finished, Sterling, the chairman growled, his voice vibrating with absolute fury. Right on cue, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung wide open. 4 large, heavily built corporate security guards stepped into the room, their expressions dead serious. I had briefed the head of security earlier that morning. They knew exactly what to do. Vance took a stumbling step back, crashing into the presentation screen. You cannot do this. I built this department. I bring in 22% of the revenue. I will sue you. I will sue all of you for defamation. You cannot sue anyone, I replied calmly, stepping closer. Because you are currently facing an immediate termination for cause. Your stock options are entirely revoked. Your benefits are severed. You will receive exactly $0 in severance pay. And the police are currently waiting in the main lobby downstairs with a signed warrant for grand theft and corporate fraud. Your brother-in-law has already been detained. Vance collapsed inward. The untouchable golden boy, the tyrant who had made so many lives a living nightmare, simply broke. He let out a pathetic, whimpering sob as the security guards grabbed him roughly by the arms. One guard reached out and forcefully unclipped his corporate identification badge from his expensive lapel, tossing it onto the table. They dragged him out of the boardroom. He did not go quietly. He screamed, pleaded, and cried as they hauled him toward the elevator. The entire executive floor, the very people he had mocked and stepped on for years, stepped out of their offices to watch him be escorted out in absolute disgrace. The heavy boardroom doors clicked shut, cutting off his pathetic cries. The room was left in a stunned, breathless silence. The tyrant was gone. The nightmare was finally over. I turned away from the door and walked slowly toward the empty seat at the right hand of the chairman. I sat down carefully, resting my wooden cane against the edge of the mahogany table. I reached for the crystal water pitcher, poured myself a glass, and took a long, refreshing sip. The cold water felt incredible. I set the glass down, folded my hands on the table, and looked around at the astonished faces of the investors. I offered them a sharp, professional smile. Now, I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the quiet room, shall we begin discussing actual operations? Thank you so much to all the wonderful listeners for joining me today and staying until the very end of this journey. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop your city or country in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's story and felt that satisfying thrill of justice, please consider helping our team out with just a $1 donation. You can scan the QR code right here on the screen, or use the donation link in the description and the pinned comment. Your support is the only way our hardworking staff can afford to feed their families and keep creating these amazing stories for you. Thank you again, and I will see you in the next story.